Maybe I just speak for about 15 minutes and then we'll have more time for questions and answers rather than my giving a long thing. Have you circulated? I've sent you. Okay. I have actually circulated a PowerPoint which gives captures the essence of the new law in summary, which I hope will be circulated to all of you. And there's also a FAQ which tries to answer some of the questions that have been raised by different sections. Let me begin by saying that Parliament has passed the bill, it's now an act. The President has given his assent. We are now in the process of forming the rules, the procedures, the detailed guidelines. We hope to have a working draft of this ready by the end of next week. We'll make it public. We'll have 45 days for getting comments and suggestions and feedback from different organizations. And then we'll notify the Act. There are two options for the notification of the Act. Either the Act will get notified with effect from January 1st, 2014, at the beginning of the calendar year, or it will get notified from April 1st, 2014, which is the financial year. There are arguments both in favor and against both these dates, so we're going through those. But the important activity now is the finalization of the rules, the procedures and the guidelines, and this is going to be a consultative and participative process as the preparation of the bill was. And as I said, by the end of next week, we should have a public document which I will share. We have also agreed that we'll have a permanent rules advisory committee on the implementation of the law. We'll have different stakeholders. We'll be notifying the Rules Advisory Committee next week. And I'm sure that organizations like CII will be represented. And the idea of this Rules Advisory Committee is to meet, say, once a quarter and review the implementation of the rules, the procedures and the guidelines and the law itself. I don't have to tell you the background to why the 1894 Act had to go. The 1894 Act, Land Acquisition Act, was amended 3 times in 119 years. And a 4th amendment was an option that is available, but that was rejected because of very valid reasons. Because in fundamental structure, the 1894 Act was flawed because it gave untold powers to the district administration in the form of the collector and to the state government and to the central government, indeed. The exercise of the notion of eminent domain had led to a situation where we had forcible land acquisition in many cases. We had large number of cases in which land much more than what was needed was actually acquired. We had instances where governments acquired the land and sold the land to private parties, acquired it in the name of the public purpose and sold it to private parties. We also had instances where governments acquired land and for 30, 40 years squatted on the land and did not use that land for the purposes for which it was acquired. We had instances where less than adequate and less than fair compensation was paid to the landowners. And suddenly, since the law did not have any provisions, land acquisition was not accompanied by resettlement and rehabilitation simply because the law did not have any provisions for it. So I think in the last couple of years, land agitations marked the Indian landscape across the length and breadth of our country. We had land agitations relating to land acquisition. In Orissa, in UP, in Maharashtra, in Haryana, in Gujarat, in various parts of the country. And I think the response of the governments for the last 10 years has been to somehow come with a new legislation to replace what was clearly a colonial area legislation which had deeply anti-democratic foundations. So the process of drafting the new law started. The bill was introduced in Parliament on the 5th of September 2011, and the bill became an act on the 5th of September 2013. So it took about 2 years to complete the legislative process. Now, what are the main provisions of this new law? The new Act has four big components. The component number one is the consent component. Component number two is the compensation component. Component number three is the resettlement and rehabilitation component. And the fourth component is the procedure component, which is anchored in what is called the social impact assessment. The consent component is applicable where governments acquire land for purposes other than what are defined as public purposes. There is an elaborate definition of what a public purpose is, and unlike in 1894, what this Act does is incorporate in the body of the legislation itself what that public purpose is constituted by. So rather than leave it vague for interpretation, we have in fact almost 2 pages in the law deals with the definition of what a public purpose is. And if I have to face criticism from organizations like yours, I also have to face criticism from a large number of organizations, civil society organizations, for having expanded the definition of public purpose so broadly so as to ensure that many of the acquisition purposes would come under the definition of what constitutes a public purpose. So for public purpose, the consent clause is not applicable. But where governments acquire land for private companies, 80% consent of landowners is essential, written consent is essential. And where governments acquire land for PPP projects, 70% written consent of the landowners is essential. So these are the 2 essential features of the consent component. The compensation component hikes the compensation given to landowners 4 times in rural areas and 2 times in urban areas, with a sliding scale from 4 to 2 as we move away from rural areas to urban areas, and the architecture of that sliding scale has been left to the state governments to determine. But the bare minimum compensation is 4 times in rural areas and 2 times in urban areas. Now 4 times of what and 2 times of what is the big question. You all know that today in most states of the country, the anchor, the base is the circle rate. And we all know how artificially depressed that circle rate is. It does not reflect the true value of the land that is being acquired. And therefore what we have done is incorporated in the body of the law itself the basis on which the multiple of 4 and the multiple of 2 would be applied. The circle rate is one indicator, but in addition to the circle rate, what we have said is the average sale deed in the last 3 years. You take the highest value of sale in year 1, the highest value in year 2, the highest value in year 3, you take the average of the 3, and that has to be compared to the circle rate. If that is lower than the circle rate is applied. If that is higher than the circle rate, then the average of the highest value of the last 3 years' sales in the vicinity of where the land is being acquired will be applied, and the factor of 4 and the factor of 2 then gets applied on this base. So this is compensation. Compensation is, I should say, that we have put it into the body of the law deliberately because unlike in 1894, where the collector could determine what the compensation is based on what the state government decides on what is fair compensation, what is fair and what is equitable is actually embodied in the law itself, so that there is no scope for deviation, there is no scope for discretionary intervention. The collector has to just follow the process in the law and announce the award based on what the procedure in the law is. So this is what, as far as the compensation is concerned, the compensation accrues not just to landowners, but for the first time it also accrues to landless, it accrues to sharecroppers, it accrues to tenants, and it accrues to livelihood losers. Because we have seen, and there are many instances of land acquisition, I don't have to take names here, but there have been many instances of land acquisition where the primary brunt of the cost of land acquisition has fallen not on landowners per se, but on livelihood losers. And that is why the compensation clause has been expanded, unlike in 1894, where it was restricted to land losers. This time it is applicable to land losers as well as to livelihood losers. Let me now turn to the third component, which is the R&R component, the resettlement and rehabilitation component, which in my view is the most critical and perhaps in my view the most significant aspect of the new legislation. So far in India, we have not had any law for R&R. We've had only policies and administrative guidelines for R&R. We have not had any legal framework for resettlement and rehabilitation. The consequence of this is that in the last 60 years, across the length and breadth of the country, particularly in central and eastern India, anywhere between 3 crore to 5 crore tribal families have got displaced because of irrigation projects, power projects, mining projects, urban development projects, without having gone through the discipline and protocol of the R&R. And not only that, you have large number of families who have been displaced not once, but have been subject to multiple displacement. And my judgment, one of the prime reasons why Maoist organizations have been able to get fuel for their propaganda in states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, parts of Andhra, parts of Maharashtra, is because of these phenomena of multiple displacements and communities who have not really received the benefits of R&R because of large-scale development projects. Now, R&R has been stipulated in the law. What constitutes R&R has been stipulated in the law. The process of land acquisition would not be complete till the process of R&R begins. We're not saying the process of R&R should be completed, because the process of R&R can take 10 years to 15 years. But the process of R&R should begin, and there should be demonstrable evidence that it has begun, and the financial package that is associated with the R&R is actually deposited with the state government. So this is as far as the third component is concerned. The fourth component is the procedural component, the manner in which the acquisition takes place. All acquisitions will be accompanied by a social impact assessment. The social impact assessment is nothing but a description of what land is being acquired, how much land is being acquired, how much land is needed to be acquired, and who are the livelihood losers, who are the land losers. Basically, it's a status report on what the impact of the land acquisition is going to be. The social impact assessment is in the public domain. It is available for anybody to question and challenge. But the process of land acquisition will be preceded by the completion of the social impact assessment. Now, these are the four broad pillars of the law: consent, compensation, R&R, and the process of SIA. Let me make a couple of observations on some very important provisions that we have made in the law, which you need to which all of us need to take note of. First, governments acquiring land for public purpose will find it very difficult to divert that land for anything other than the public purpose. When governments acquire the land and sell the land, as we have seen in many states, 40% of the incremental value will have to go back to the original landowner. If governments acquire land and that land is not used for 5 years, that land goes back to the landowner or to the land bank, depending on what the state government wants it to be. A large amount of land has been purchased in many states after September 5th, 2011, in anticipation of the new law coming, and in expectation that the land that was purchased will be acquired by the government, and the purchaser then would get this windfall bonanza of 4 times compensation in rural areas and 2 times compensation in urban areas. To deal with this situation of unintended windfall gains to speculators and middlemen who actually purchased the land for the sole purpose of its being acquired by government under the new law, we have made a provision that 40% of the value of the increased compensation that would accrue to these people who have purchased the land after September 5th, 2011 would accrue to the original landowner from whom the land was purchased. Another very important provision which has drawn a lot of attention, particularly from industry, on which I'd like to spend a couple of minutes, is the retrospective clause. We had initially the retrospective clause, then we didn't, then we removed the retrospective clause, then we reintroduced the retrospective clause. So the retrospective clause has had a checkered history. But in the final analysis, there was a political consensus that this law should not only be for the future, but there must be some recognition of certain historical injustices that may have been perpetrated in the name of land acquisition for public purpose. So there are three specific conditions. Three, and only three, I want to stress, there are three and only three specific conditions under which the retrospective clause gets activated. Condition number one, when the process of land acquisition under the old act has been initiated, but the award has not been announced, then compensation under the new act will be given. The process of land acquisition does not start under the new act. Since it has already been initiated under the old act, it's only the compensation element gets jacked up 4 times or 2 times as the case may be, in instances where the award has not been announced. So this is condition number one. Condition number two, where the land acquisition under the old act has been started, the award has been announced, but physical possession of the land has not taken place. The land acquisition process has started under the old act, the award has been announced, but physical possession of the land has not taken place. Then again, the land acquisition doesn't get reopened, compensation gets increased 4 times or 2 times as the case may be. The third case in which the retrospective clause becomes available is when a majority of the landowners have not accepted the compensation. When the majority of landowners have not accepted the compensation, and we define accepted compensation as compensation not having been deposited into the bank accounts, where they have not accepted the compensation, then even though the process may have been initiated under the old act, we will not reopen the process of acquisition. The compensation factor would be applicable as per the new act. So these are the only 3 conditions in which the retrospective clause becomes applicable. This becomes applicable not to reopen the process of land acquisition, I should stress, but they become applicable only for the process of awarding compensation, which, as I said, is 4 or 2, depending on where you are. So these are some of the salient features of the bill. I believe the bill is in response to a large degree of dissatisfaction and anger amongst the farming community, amongst the tribal communities, particularly in central and eastern India, and generally amongst people who have lost their livelihoods through a process of land acquisition. I should stress that this is a law for land acquisition. This is not a law for land purchase. There's a lot of confusion in the media and in discussions. They're saying that we are regulating the purchase or the sale of land. We are not. If industry or builders want to go and buy the land, they're perfectly free to go and buy the land. We are not interfering in that process. All we are saying is, if private industry or private builders want governments to acquire the land, then they have to go through the protocol and discipline of this new act. There is only one provision in this whole act that deals with private purchase. And that provision is that private purchase of land should be accompanied by resettlement and rehabilitation assistance beyond a certain threshold. What that threshold is to be determined by the state governments. Now, there can be a very industry-friendly state government which can say that all private purchases over 1,000 acres of land would attract R&R. And there could be a very, quote-unquote, people-friendly state government which will say, no, 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 all land purchases over 100 acres would apply R&R. So this has been left entirely to the state governments. All we have said is that beyond a certain threshold to be determined by the state government, the provisions of R&R should be applicable, because we don't want private purchase to lead to large-scale displacement, because that has been, unfortunately, the reality of our country. My perspective and my vision is that 20 years from now, we will not need a law for land acquisition. That all land transactions would be in the private domain. The buyers of land would interact with the sellers of land. Those who want land will go and buy the land. And the Land Acquisition Act would be applicable only in extraordinary circumstances, where you have no other option but to acquire the land in the name of urgency. Under the old act, the urgency clause was the most abused clause. in the name of urgency, governments acquired land, and we all know the track record of governments on the use of that land which was acquired in the name of urgency. In the new Act, the urgency clause is limited only to natural calamities and national security and nothing else. But 20 years from now, it's perfectly possible that land records get modernized. We have separately, and I can answer questions on this, what we are doing to modernize land records. You mentioned that in your opening remarks. And I believe that once we have reached a situation where land records are robust, up-to-date, available online, are in the public domain, and land buyers and land sellers engage in direct transactions, and land sellers have enough bargaining power, I believe then we would not need such an act. We certainly do not need an act for another 119 years, as was the case with the previous act. This act has been enacted as per the concurrent list of the Indian Constitution. As you know, there are 3 lists. There's a central list, there's a state list, and there's a concurrent list. Land acquisition is an entry in the concurrent list of the Indian Constitution. What this means is that the central government can frame a law for land acquisition. The state governments are free to have their own laws for land acquisition, but in case of a conflict between the central law and the state law, the central law prevails. So what this further means is that state governments are free to improve on the provisions of the law. A state government can say 4 times the provision compensation is not adequate. We want to increase the compensation to 6 times. But they cannot make the 4 times 3 times. They can make that 4 times compensation factor 6 times. They cannot derogate from this law. They can add to this law. So what this act does is really establish a baseline for consent, a baseline for compensation, a baseline for R&R, and a certain baseline for the procedure to be gone through. For each activity in the procedure, timelines have been stipulated in the Act, and how the procedure has to be, how the processes have to be implemented has not been left to the rules. They are very much in the Act. They will also, of course, be repeated in the rules as well. They'll be given further shape and detail in the rules, but they have been in the Act in order for us to show our seriousness in implementing the timelines. We have made penalties part of the law for any abrogation or any breaking of the timelines by the land acquiring authorities. We have put that into the law as well. So there's the question that what happens if the provisions of the law are violated is very much there in the law and is not being left to the rules, as is normally the case. So let me just summarize by saying that don't believe me, believe Kotak. I just have a report that has been prepared by Kotak Institutional Securities, which debunks many of the fears and concerns that have been expressed by industry associations. And I would request you to have a look at this little nice document that has been prepared. I didn't know about this document, by the way. It was not a joint venture between me and Kotak, I can assure you. But what it shows is that yes, there are concerns. There are concerns about procedures. There are concerns about delays. But the concerns that land costs are going to rise to astronomical levels is largely inflated. And there are a lot of numbers which they have shown based on projects. So I leave this to CII to circulate at some later occasion. Let me summarize by saying, in response to what Chris has just said, that yes, we will work with industry in the formulation of the rules. I'll share with you the draft rules in the next week, the procedures, the guidelines. I'll share it with you. You can share it with your members. We have a 45-day period. I'm willing to extend the 45-day period to a 60-day period, and we can have another session where we go through the rules, the procedures, and the guidelines in some detail, so that many of the concerns that you have raised, particularly insofar as the time taken for land acquisition, do get addressed meaningfully. The Act itself is available. It's in the public domain. I request you to read the Act because many of the comments that I have seen are born out of not reading the Act. Many of the things that are said about the bill, about the Act, do not figure in the Act. So I'd request you to read the Act, and I'd request you to keep this in mind, that this is only for land acquisition. We have made a provision for land leasing in the Act. We have left the rules of the leasing entirely up to the state government. We are not stipulating how the land should be leased, but if a state government wants to follow the leasing option, it is free to adopt that leasing option as well. So it's I think the formulation of this Act, the preparation of this Act has been a balancing act between various interest groups, various stakeholders. Industry had to be taken along, farmers' organizations had to be taken along, civil society groups had to be taken along, state governments had to be taken along, political parties had to be taken along, and I think at the end of 2 years, I can honestly say an attempt has been made to take everybody along. The net result of taking everybody along is that everybody has been displeased to some extent or the other. If on the one hand FICCI and CII are concerned about the bill, and if on the other hand Medha Patkar and others are also concerned about the bill, it means that I may have done something right. If on the one hand Manishankar Iyer says that this bill is not progressive enough, and if on the other hand Swaminathan S. Iyer writes that this bill is a Luddite prescription, I think I have done something right. So this is a middle path bill. It's a bill at a compromise. It's an act of a compromise of trying to take people along. And if there is need for amendment as we move through, I would be the first person to say, yes, let's change the provisions. I'm reminded of what our Prime Minister is fond of quoting Lord Keynes. And one of the most famous sayings of Lord Keynes was, somebody went to Lord Keynes and said, Mr. Keynes, you keep changing your mind so often. What do I make of you? So he said, when I face facts, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? So I'm sure as the law gets implemented, there will be some new facets of the law that will get thrown up, which we have not envisaged. And I assure you that we have an open mind, and we will go along and we will make the law responsive to these changes. Thank you.
Thank you.